Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. A couple of quick announcements for those of you who have not had lunch. Don't worry, it does go until 2 o'clock, or 12 to 2, so you'll be safe. Don't forget the poster session in the Sports Center runs from 1 to 3 o'clock. Please get over and check out the posters. A lot of good hard work over there. Many of you are interested in the prescribed fire that's scheduled for tomorrow. It has been canceled due to the weather. For those of you that are doing the S-130-190 training, that training the field session will be on the 28th at 0900 at the Fort Kent Fire Department. Those of you that need to do the PT to go out of state, that will be on Sunday at noon at the Fort Kent Fire Department. Okay? Please, if you will, turn off your cell phones and help me welcome Mr. Jonathan Hayes, a master's candidate, who will be presenting his research on white-tailed deer. Thank you, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, everybody. As he said, my name is Jonathan Hayes, and I'm doing a master's study. This is my thesis work on winter survivability of white-tailed deer. Everybody see that okay? In this research, we are principal investigators, President Wilson Hess, and is he here today? Thank you, President Hess, for being here, and thank you for being a part of the study. And Dr. Stephen Hansen from the biology department here at the University of Maine at Fort Kent. Cooperators, the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife have already given 2 state biologists 3 weeks to this project. And we just began this project a little over a month ago, so that's a lot of manpower, a lot of hours on the road that they've spent to get this project up and running. Landowners, and I'll be recognizing them at the end of the presentation. Plum Creek's biologist, Ray Airy. I just got off the phone with him. UMFK students and alumni, a couple of biology students that graduated with me have helped in the project, and some current field ecology and wildlife habitat interaction students have already been participating in the study. This is from 1998 to 2008. This is the population decline of the white-tailed deer in Maine. Now, this is inclusive of the entirety of Maine, which means that these issues, this decline is magnified here in northern Maine where we live. What you see here is the winter of 2007-2008, and you see the dramatic decline there. What we don't see in this is the 2008-2009 winter, which was a repeat winter, very bad weather, and some estimate that the population numbers would have been right about here, about 170,000. And again, all of that's magnified here in northern Maine. And so this is what our research is addressing in general, and I'll be a little bit more particular as we go. Hunting in Maine is a $500 million industry every year. There's about 200,000 hunters every year. That's about 6,500 jobs. And so this is business. And so when it's economics like that, then politics get involved. I'm not a politician or an economist, so I'm going to be looking for my introduction to the natural history of the species here in Maine rather than those things. But the Commissioner of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and the Governor of the state of Maine made this a priority in 2011. They came out with a Maine game plan for the deer, a plan to increase Maine's northern, eastern, and western deer herd. And this is the plan that they came up with. There's a 5-point strategy in this, and we'll look at that again in a minute. There's a 5-point strategy in the governor's plan, and this research that we're doing is addressing all 5 points of the governor and commissioner's strategy for improving the white-tailed deer population. So to look at the natural history, we're talking about a temperate animal from a temperate region in a boreal forest. And I'm going to just assume for the sake of time that you all know what those things mean. There's a reason why the word Virginia is in the Latin name for white-tailed deer. They ain't from around here. In the 1600s, They were in the southernmost part of Maine only, along riparian areas, along the waterways. And the rest of the state of Maine was more suited for boreal species like moose and caribou. That's why we have Caribou, Maine right down the road. But logging practices, agriculture, the extirpation of apex predators like the wolf and the mountain lion made it less suitable here for those boreal species of caribou and moose, and welcome to Maine, invited up the white-tailed deer population. By the mid-1800s, a third of Maine's forests had been turned into agricultural croplands, which made it more conducive for white-tailed deer. By the mid-1900s, mechanized timber harvesting created what could be a boom or bust potential cycle for the white-tailed deer. It can be very beneficial to them. Timber cutting can be very beneficial to them, and it can also be devastating. And so that's what we've been seeing since the mid-1900s. So they have adapted, but their adaptations have not been physiological. The white-tailed deer's adaptations have been more behavioral. They have accentuated, they've monopolized on strategies that they use in the South to a lesser degree, and they have made them kind of anchors for seeing themselves through the harsh winters up here. We're going to talk about those. Some of those are yarding up. The deer have yarded up. They go to their deer yards. Scientists, biologists refer to that as deer wintering areas, or DWAs. In the South, they only yard up when the snow starts to get deep. But what we're seeing in New Brunswick, what we're seeing in Quebec, and what we're already seeing in this study is the deer can't wait until the snow is deep to yard up. So their behavioral adaptation is that they are making small migrations, even long migrations, to get to quality deer yards and hope that those deer yards are still there when they get there. So that's the behavioral adaptation of the white-tailed deer. So what do they need? There is some debate about this, and our research is going to better answer the question of what they need for a deer wintering area. But you know, what you need and what you get isn't always the same thing. It's just the same with the deer. What they need and what they're getting here in northern Maine is not the same. They need mature coniferous or softwood forest. This does a few things for them. It acts as a microclimate. It's a thermal blanket to keep some of the warmth in. The other thing that it does is it cuts down on the snow depth. So if it's 4 feet of snow outside of this this umbrella of coniferous trees, then it might be 2 feet of snow underneath. And then they pack those trails down, and it makes it easier for them to avoid predators. They can spend less energy getting to their browse, to their food. So they need mature coniferous forest, preferably hemlock. And again, I'm not going to cite all of this. This is just from research that has been done in the region. Again, this cuts down on snow depth. They also need nearby this softwood growth. They need successional or hardwood growth that is at different stages of growth, so that they can browse on the buds of the hardwood trees. As you know, we don't have a lot of that in northern Maine for obvious reasons. So that's just part of it. The other part is that they need all of that I just described on a south-facing slope. They need it near a riparian area, near a lake or near a river, so that they can go out and soak up the sun's warmth and for other reasons. So there is a quite intricate description of what they actually need. But above all of that, they need that to be in the same place year after year, because they're traveling to get to that spot year after year, and they will go to that spot not knowing. They don't have the newspapers, they don't have GPS like we do. They don't know that it's been cut. So if they're traveling to get there, they're going to travel to get there, whether it's still there or not. So that's what they need. What do they have here in the state of Maine? Oftentimes, especially here in northern Maine, we have what we call a coniferous monoculture. Instead of having a mix of hardwood and softwood, current timber practices are that you spray to thin out the hardwoods, and then you go in and mechanically thin out the hardwoods so that you have all of these coniferous trees, these softwood trees, or Christmas trees for the commoner, that are growing up all at the same age, at the same stage of growth, and this isn't good for the ecology of the region. It's definitely not good for the deer population in the region. Now, from the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Study, they say that the number one problem with the white-tailed deer herd in northern Maine is the lack of quality habitat. Up to 80% of the deer wintering areas in northern Maine, according to MDIFW, has been rendered unusable through forest practices, is what they said. 50% of the forest up here, up to 50%, is saplings and seedlings, not what the deer need. And I'm going to rush through the rest of this because there's way too much to talk about, and I'd like to have time for questions toward the end. Winter mortality. On a bad winter, we're losing 35% of our deer herd, but that's just the beginning of a domino effect, or a ripple effect that continues on after that winter. And then when you get 2 bad winters in a row, then you really start to stack up the problems on the deer. When you have a bad winter, interspecific competition comes into play. Moose are eating the same thing that the deer are eating. The snowshoe hare are eating the same thing that the deer are eating. When the snow gets deep, those snowshoe hare are eating on the same strata of the forest that the deer is eating on. So these things start to come into play. Every year, our deer experience an energy deficit. Every year, they spend more energy during the winter than they are gaining through their food every year. That is magnified when we have a harsh winter, which up here in northern Maine is how often? Just about every year. We had a good year this year. So what happens is they go on the starvation diet. And again, the starvation diet is a softwood diet, usually balsam. And any timber people here, how much balsam do we have here in northern Maine? 70% of their winter diet should be balsam after they've used up their softwood, their hardwood browse. 20% spruce, 10% lichens, and this is just a diet to stave off starvation. This is just a diet to slow down the loss of weight until they get to the winter. But without hemlock, without cedar, without those things, they have to go to spruce. The problem with eating spruce is a deer's digestive system cannot handle any more than 40% of their diet being spruce. And that's a large portion of what we have here. Toward the end of the winter, they've exhausted all of that, and they're literally waiting for a windfall. They're waiting for the winds to come through the top of the trees, knock the lichens down out of the top of the trees so that they can eat, and then the lichens can become as much as 50% of the deer's diet. So on the starvation diet, what happens is the yearlings are the first ones to die. Over 100 days on the starvation diet, and the yearlings will die. After that, you have the mature bucks. Why does it skip over the does and go to the mature bucks? Because they were crazy during the rut, chasing after females, spending all of their energy, losing all of their weight, and so they are one of the most susceptible to winter starvation. Then the does that survive the harsh winter produce a third less fawns. Those fawns that are born are smaller and weaker than they should be, and by the end of that year, they're going into a winter having not reached their genetic potential. They're not as big as they could have been if they had been born to a healthy mother, and so they're more susceptible to predation, they're more susceptible to starvation, and things of that nature. So that is the ripple effect, that's the domino effect that takes place for years after one hard winter with the deer. So the questions that we want to answer is, what habitat are the deer really using and why? Everyone thinks they know, but with satellite collars on deer that are telling us where they're at every 3 hours, we can know that we know what type of habitat they're using and why. How far are they traveling between their summer range and winter range, and why? In the south, deer may spend their entire life within a 1.5 mile radius of where they were born. I've heard numbers as high as 50 to 70 miles from areas like Michigan, although I've not seen any of that documented yet. But we are already starting to see some very interesting information that I'll be sharing with you about how far they're traveling between these ranges. Site fidelity. Are they faithful to the same deer wintering yard year after year? One Quebec study suggests that for 2 years after a deer wintering area was cut, the deer continued to come back to this spot, although the habitat was no longer there. Now, if you're going to have a hard winter, if the deer have traveled to get to a deer wintering area and that deer wintering area no longer exists, that can be very problematic. How do the deer respond to cold snaps, storms, heat waves? What are the effects of humans feeding the deer? And what's the causation of mortality? Wouldn't it be nice to get right on the deer within a few days of it dying and determining why it died? Was it predation, or was it scavenged after it died? Did it starve? Did it die of disease? We can find all that out because the collars tell us within 10 hours, the collars let us know if the deer has died. Before I talk about the stages of research, I want you to look. This is a deer that we collared in the Allagash, and doesn't she look lovely with her new necklace and earrings? This is a hardwood tree. Can you see how the bark has been stripped off of that tree behind that deer? And I didn't think of that when I didn't take this picture actually. Mark McBride took this picture, but it shows even in an area where they're being fed, as many of these deer are being fed in the Allagash, they're still resorting to eating the bark off the trees during the winter. Stage 1 of the research has been accomplished. We've deployed the collars. Stage 2, we've already begun stage 2. We've begun engaging students here. Jamie's been out with me. Adam's been out with me. I don't know if Tom is here, Chris. Some of the other students here have already been out to look at the habitat, to triangulate where the deer are using telemetry. So we're already engaging UMFK students. We're already gathering data, and also in stage 2 next year, we're deploying 10 more collars, 5 more in the Allagash, 5 more in Beaver Cove. Then we're going to publish the findings. This is the collar that we're using. This collar does 3 things. It has 3 boxes on it. It has, of course, the VHF so that you can go out there and do telemetry and find out where the deer is. But above that, every 3 hours, the GPS box on this receives from the satellite exactly where that deer is and stores it. It takes a lot more energy for the collar to broadcast than it does to store the data. So it only broadcasts that information back to the satellite every Saturday. So every Saturday, I get to download where all of these deer have been every 3 hours for the past week, down to very, very fine scale. So it has the VHF, it has the GPS satellite box on it, and this little black box here, when a plane crashes, you have the black box that tells you where it is, right? Well, that black box, we've programmed it so that the deer doesn't have to spend its life with this collar around its neck. The collar falls off at a predetermined time. It sends us a GPS coordinate of where the collar is. Also, it sends out a VHF signal of where the collar is. We can recover this very expensive collar. We can reprogram it and get it back out into the field again on another deer. So it's a long-term investment, not a short-term investment. The dart gun, and again, I'm going to try and rush through this. I don't have much more time. It's a new dart gun. It uses a 22-round charge. The dart that you're seeing here that we're loading from the top has a transmitter in the bottom, so that once you shoot the deer and it runs off, we can use telemetry to track down the deer to find out where it was. Sometimes that works great. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. One of our deer set her rump right down into some ice cold water and shorted out the telemetry device, and so we had to find her the good old-fashioned way. I'm going to skip over the rest of this. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have on that. The state of Maine provided, we were going to ear tag them anyway, but the state of Maine provided these because they wanted to notify anyone that wanted to eat these deer that they had been a part of this study. So the sedation, we had to measure out exactly 12 yards for the shot. It's not because we're bad shots. This is way more like throwing a spear at a deer with these large darts than it is shooting a bullet at them. At 12 yards, this dart is dropping 6 inches. And that gets exponentially worse the further out you go. Any closer, and you're going to push that dart into the deer too much. So it wasn't an easy proposition. Hunting's great, 100 yards, 10 yards, whatever. But with this, it had to be exactly 12 yards or we would not take the shot. And that was for the deer's welfare. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say about this slide. The drugs. The drugs, if they were under 40 degrees, they began to solidify again. And in the Allagash, in March, every day was under 40 degrees. So we had to work very hard, especially once we put that dart in that cold barrel. We had to work very hard to keep those drugs warm and still be ready when the deer showed up. That was frustrating. So after we sedated, we shot the deer with the tranquilizer, then we had to find the deer. We used telemetry, and we wanted to get to the deer as soon as we could. The deer usually went down in 12 minutes. Sometimes the deer never went down. And and everything in between. We wanted to get to the deer quickly because there had been a lot of milk, there was a lot of standing water, and the last thing we wanted was for a deer to go down in standing water without us there to tend to that deer. So after we secured and located the deer, the next thing, and I do want to spend just a moment on this, is the animal welfare, the welfare of the deer. I was honored to work with state biologist Scott McClellan on this, and Doug Kane, but Scott McClellan had spent 10 years working with the endangered red wolf in North Carolina, 6 years in Clayton Lake working on the Canada lynx, and he treated every one of these deer as though it was an endangered species. And I really appreciated that. And he taught me a lot about that. Coming from a mushing background, I know animal welfare always comes first, but that's what we did. When we got to the deer, we didn't worry about what we wanted from the deer. The first thing we worried about was the deer. We took its temperature, and that's a different issue. We had some interesting issues with that. We cleared the area of any debris that the deer could hurt itself on when it did come to and try to walk away. We got it on its sternum so the gases in its stomach wouldn't hurt it. We put eye ointment on because it couldn't blink. We checked its respiration. We kept it dry. We kept it warm. We actually had heat. We were working 16, 17 hours. We had these heat pads that we put up underneath the deer. And then when I would get back from a 16-hour day, I'd go and boil these heat packs to recharge them for the next day to make sure that the deer would be warm when we got the next deer. So this is us putting on the collar of the deer, and we took measurements as well. Scott McClellan with the headlamp on. I was asked why he had a headlamp on in the middle of the daytime. He had to look down into the mouth of the deer to determine its age. We measured its head. We measured its total body length. The collars only came with pre-drilled holes every inch, and it's not a one-size-fits-all thing, so we actually took a drill gun into the field with us, and we would custom fit every collar. The manufacturer suggests that you only put 2 fingers under the collar, but the Connecticut biologists were using 4. So every time we put a collar on a deer, we had this discussion that you see right here. We want it to be loose, but not too loose. And so we would check and double check each other before we cinched the collar down. And here doing video and photography is John Farino, one of the alumni of the University of Maine here at Fort Kent. The deer would go between 100 yards and a quarter mile once shot. Out of the 5 last deer that we tranquilized, only one of them, the transmitter, worked. A couple times the dart hit the deer, injected the deer, and then the dart fell off and the deer ran off. So 4 out of the 5 last deer we actually had to recover the old-fashioned way. Scott McClellan has a lot of experience in tracking. I kind of referred to my Marine Corps training for my side of it, and we happened to recover all of them. Then the deer recovery, we'd sit with each one of the deer until it recovered. There's more I could say about that, but I'm going to move on. The next day, we'd check on each of the deer that we had tranquilized. We'd go out in the field, We use telemetry. This is Eric Alquist, another alumni of the University of Maine at Fort Kent. Got Adam and Tom, who are current, field ecology students here that are helping with the telemetry. And what we want to do is we want to make sure the deer are moving. We didn't actually have to make visual with them. You can't really see it here, but you see a little white collar there and a head. We just wanted to make sure that the deer were doing all right on the next day. And doesn't she look beautiful with her nice blingage? But this is the best kind of assurance that the deer are doing okay. There are 2 deer, and Mark McBriarty, are you here? Mark McBriarty is a landowner that took this video, and you just can't get better. Look at those beautiful white rings around her ears. She's got white feet too. We call her White Socks. Very interesting looking deer. And this is a deer wintering area. Don't you wish that we had deer like this everywhere? But they're all kind of concentrated in that area because they had not left their deer wintering area yet.
Excuse me, John?
Yes.
It's quarter of.
Okay.
Quite a few people have to be at their posters at 1 o'clock and have not had lunch yet. So those of you that have to do that, would you feel free to excuse yourself? I'm sure John doesn't mind going on a little bit longer to answer some questions. So those of you that have to be at your posters, have not yet gotten lunch, please feel free to excuse yourself. And then John, I'll leave it up to you as to when you want to finish.
Okay, in conclusion, what's next? We're going to monitor the deer. We're going to collar 10 more deer. We're going to publish our findings. We're going to recover our collars for redeployment. I'm going to write a thesis on it for a master's degree and use the results to improve white-tailed deer survivability in northern Maine. Here are some of the people that I want to thank. Sue Baroque, the deer whisperer up there from Beaver Cove, landowner that helped and took a lot of these pictures, Mark McBriarty, and some alumni students, 2 state biologists, Scott McClellan and Douglas Kane up there. Also want to thank, of course, Dr. Stephen Hansen, once again. Without him, this wouldn't be possible at all. His grant writing has been phenomenal, and his leadership in this. President Wilson Hess, I want to thank you again for your support in this. The University of Maine system, Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, landowners, alumni, students, and you all today. I do have some of the data for the last few weeks that we have taken on the deer, some satellite positions that I could show, but for the sake of time right now, I'm going to open it up for questions. Dr. Hansen, if you have anything you'd like to add to this, I'd like to give you the opportunity to.
Go ahead. Ask questions.
Yes.
My question is about food plots. A lot of hunters in Maine use them arguably the more of a hunting technique than they are management. Is there something hunters can do at their level to help manage deer with agriculture? Should they think more about forest practices?
The state is investigating that. There are a lot of, I've had some really in-depth conversations with everyone from lieutenants of the Game Warden Service to state biologists on that issue. The state has a unified position on it, and that's that you shouldn't be feeding the deer, and if you do it, you need to do it the right way. There are a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to that we're hoping to answer a little bit in this study. I think everyone has opinions. I have my opinions on that issue, but I'd be speaking out of turn in the early stages of this project to lend any credence to my opinion, from this project on that and give an answer to that. Someone else with a question?
Once you tranquilize the deer, like how long before they wake up? Like how long do you have to? On
average, it was an hour and a half. But oftentimes that was another issue, is we had to up our dosage because we were using the dosages that Connecticut was using, and the deer were just walking away. So we upped it by 10%, and even at that, we would oftentimes, once we got to the deer, have to give it a second dose there just to take it completely under. And when we had to give it that second dose, oftentimes it would be as much as 2.5 hours we'd be babysitting the deer at that point. This is the Beaver Cove Deer Yard here, and I just wanted to show very quickly that that once the weather started getting warm, we had 2 deer that started to leave and came up here to the Roach Pond area, and then the weather started to turn cold again, and they turned around and started to come back. This is about 12 miles. And then the weather got warm again. And so this deer made a beeline up between Ragged Lake and Caribou Lake. You know, the Golden Road passes through there. And it's interesting, the state biologist got a phone call and someone said, I just saw a deer with a collar on it pass the Golden Road. And they said, no, well, we've got some collared deer out there, but that's not really possible. It couldn't have traveled that far. And then I checked the satellite that Saturday, and sure enough, 26 miles, almost in a straight line as a crow flies, this deer is traveling. And this isn't an isolated incident. Don't have time to talk about any more than that, but the deer are making their moves, and it's interesting to see what kind of progress they're making. Yes?
At this point, what's the maximum distance they travel from the deer now?
26 miles is the furthest, although up here, just to bring it a little closer to home, the 5 deer that we collared in Allagash, 2 of them swam across the Allagash River and started moving east. 1 of them is 6 miles south. 2 of them swam the St. John, and this is during very high water. When the ice broke, I thought, oh man, we're not going to get deer crossing the rivers. That's too bad. No, these deer are tough cookies. They swam across, and we actually have one of our deer has passed Glacier Lake and is on the northwest shore of, was it Bow Lake? Yeah. Is it Bew or Bow? Bow. The north shore of Bow Lake, that's 22 miles as the crow flies. And we're not sure that it stopped moving yet. This has all been in, I get to download my data tomorrow. I can't wait. Anyone else with a question?
Do you think the human scent on the collars has any effect on deer?
Well, that is a good question, and this could have been a picture slideshow and video show with all the video and pictures I've been getting from our collared deer over the past few weeks from the locals that live in the area. And everything that we're seeing is that the deer are doing great, interacting well. They haven't lost, because we got to watch the deer quite a bit because they had to be at exactly 12 yards. So when they were 13 to 15 yards, all we could do is sit and watch them. And so we saw their social status in the herd. And from what we're seeing in the videos, that doesn't seem to have changed at all in their interactions with the other deer. Good question. Somebody else?
Do you have a procedure for that deer if it goes into Canada?
Well, we're going to have to extradite it, I guess. It has been suggested, since we've got a couple deer heading in that direction, it has been suggested that we notify their biologists before they actually cross over. Doug Kane called me, the state biologist called me yesterday and said, you might want to tell the Canadian biologist before the deer cross over instead of after, that you've got collared deer moving into Canada. But just going to continue monitoring it. It's the wonderful thing about satellites. It doesn't matter what side of the border they're on. We don't have to get out in the field and spend hours and hours like they used to. For the findings on this, we're seeing some preliminary things that I'd love to talk about, but it's all preliminary. With science, you have to have a lot of data to come up with any conclusions, so you'll have to come back next year to hear something a little bit more conclusive about what we're seeing. Other than that, I'd love to give you my opinions after the presentation. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to turn things back over.
Okay, so if you will, please help me thank John.